Pam at Foggy Bonnet. Today I'm going to show you a quick version of how to make this card that I presented last night on my Facebook Live. I saw this technique presented by Tammy Beard at Stampin' Savvy, and it's a fun fold with an adorable pop-up inside. Isn't that great? So the card that I made for my live demonstration last night is a masculine version of this, and this is the card. It says, "Congratulations, time for a new adventure," and this is the one that I'm going to show you how to make right now. I will have all of the dimensions in the description below on this YouTube video, but I'm going to quickly go through the pieces right now. This is a piece of Night of Navy cardstock, and it's basically a half sheet. It measures 4 1/4 by 11. Night of Navy cardstock, 4 1/4 by 11. And I have my designer series paper. I have a 6 by 6 piece of designer series paper, and of the same paper I have a 4 by 5 1/8. 4 by 5 1/8. Then I have 3 pieces of basic white. I have a 3 by 3 square, and that's used on the front of the card for the stamping and the sentiment. And then I have 2 pieces that are cut to 2 3/4 inch squares, and those 2 pieces are used inside the card. And I have a mat cut for that front piece, and the mat I cut to just 1/8 inch bigger, so it's 3 1/8. So there's just a sliver of it showing. I may have cut this one to 3 3/16 just for a little more border, but either way, 3 1/8 or 3 3/16, whatever you prefer. You'll need a scrap of white and a scrap of your basic cardstock for the actual sentiment. And I also pre-cut this, I call it a captain's wheel, and I actually cut this from the back of this designer series paper. It's a wood grain, so I like that. I think it's very pretty, perfect for the navigation wheel of a ship. And the stamp sets that I'm using today are, for the sentiments, the Well Said. This is a 2-set sentiment set. It's wonderful. With this set you can come up with a sentiment for any occasion. It has coordinating dies. This set is retiring, so if it's on your list, get it now. It will retire as of May 4th when the new catalog comes out. But I used the Congratulations from this set, and then the Time for a New Adventure also. And then for my nautical stamps, this is one of my favorites. It's Sailing Home, and it comes with the Smooth Sailing Coordinating Die set, and that's where I got the wheel. The die is in this set. And then I use the lighthouse, the seagulls, and on the inside I used a sailboat and a compass. All of these are in this Sailing Home stamp set. This is no longer bundled. It's been unbundled for about 2 years now, but it's still a great stamp set, especially for masculine cards. I like to use it for that, but just a nice nautical theme set. To start, we're going to do a little bit of scoring, and the first piece I'm going to score is my card base. Very simple scoring. So we're going to score this at 4 1/4, 4 1/4, and then I'm going to just turn it over and score it at 5 1/2. And the reason I turn it over is because we're going to fold these, crease them in 2 different directions. So I like to have my score lines on opposite sides. Then we're going to score the 6x6 piece, and this is the piece that makes our wonderful pop-up in the middle. So we're going to score this with the side that we want showing face down. So I want the wood grain, see I have the wood grain showing, I want that face down on my scoring tool, and I'm going to score at 3 inches. Then I'm just going to rotate it and score it at 3 inches again. So I've scored it vertically and horizontally. Now I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to score it diagonally from one corner to another one way. And a lot of people put a mark on their scoring tool or a piece of tape so that they can follow a score line all the way down and do diagonal scores. But I just grabbed my piece of cardstock that I just scored and put it in the scoring tool, and then I just selected the first groove that I could see to the right of the cardstock, and that's what I used to line up my corners. And so I'm lining up the top and the bottom corner. I'm a little bit off the camera there, but I'm just lining up both of those corners, diagonal corners. Oops. I like to use the smaller end of my scoring tool. Just like that. And that is all of the scoring that we need to do. And next we're going to do a little bit of cutting, and we're going to cut a piece off of our what did I say this was? Our 4 by 5 1/8 piece of Designer Series paper. And if you have a direction on your paper, an obvious direction, you want to make sure that the piece you cut off is at the top. So we're going to put this in horizontal or landscape format, and we're going to cut it at 4 inches. I don't have an obvious directional pattern, so I'm not too concerned about that. What we're going to do is we're going to line this up at the 4-inch mark, and we're going to cut a 1 1/8 piece then off of the top. So I have 2 pieces now, and this is what creates these 2 pieces. Okay, we have the small piece and then we have the larger piece for down here. Next we're going to do some scoring. So I want to fold my card base in half on the 5 1/2 inch score line. So I'm going to just bring this over and just burnish that. Then I'm going to fold this piece back on the 4 1/4 inch score line, like this. And that creates our fun fold. Okay. On our 6x6 piece, we want to have our inside facing up, and we're going to fold on the vertical and the horizontal score lines. So fold on that vertical score line. And then we'll fold on the other side-to-side score line. Then we're going to flip it over and have the other side facing up, and we're going to fold on that diagonal score line that we made. And you can hold your bone folder on that crease just to get it started, and then line up your edges and burnish. And what that does is it creates that diagonal. You want it running across horizontally, and it creates a way for those side pieces to fold in, just like that. See that, how that works? Next, I want to glue this small section to the back of the card, and that creates our bookbinding look, where only this 4 1/4 inch flap opens. Okay. And I'm going to use liquid glue to do this. You could use tear and tape, you want a nice adhesion here, a good strong bond, but I'm going to use liquid glue. And bring that over. Give it a rub so I have good contact. Next, we want to adhere the two pieces of designer series paper that we created. The larger one will go down here and the smaller one up here, and you want to make sure that you keep these in the same orientation as they were before you cut the paper so that the design continues unbroken. So I like to adhere the top piece first, and again I'm just using liquid glue, and the top piece gets adhered lined up with the fold, and I'll show you that as soon as I get my glue on here. So I'm lining the bottom of this up with that fold line, and I want to make sure I have this oriented correctly, and I do. So I'm lining that up with that crease and centering it left to right, just like that. And then this larger piece gets centered on the 4 1/4 inch square flap. It doesn't get lined up on the crease, it gets centered on this flap. So again, I'm going to use my liquid glue. Just like that. And if I'm off a little bit with the first piece that I put on, the smaller piece, I try to line up the side of the larger piece in the same place so that if they're off together, and it makes an even edge on both sides, if that makes sense. Next, we want to create the sentiment piece for the front of our card, and I already have my stamp set up on my Stamparatus, and I did this ahead of time just to save a little bit of time in making this video. And so I'm just going to lay down my 3x3. This is the 3x3 white cardstock that I'm stamping on, and I'm going to use Misty Moonlight to stamp with. I chose Misty Moonlight instead of the darker Night of Navy. I like the Misty Moonlight. Just going to ink up and stamp, and that's a good impression. So the sentiment I have on the other plate of my Stamparatus, and I'm just using a piece of scrap white here to stamp on, again with the Misty Moonlight. I'll ink that up. I know I'm off camera a little bit here. And that looks good. Remember, you cannot close your Stamparatus when you have both plates on. You have to remove one of the plates first. So I'm going to remove this plate and just close this one, and I'll clean these stamps off as soon as I'm finished here. I trimmed down my sentiment pretty close to the letters, and now I'm going to adhere it to a piece of Night of Navy cardstock, and I don't want too much of a border, so I'm going to put it pretty close to the corner there. You could measure your sentiment after you trim it down and cut the cardstock ahead of time, but I like doing it this way. So I'm adhering it, getting the top and the left edge even, and then I'll trim the rest of it with my paper snips. And this is where you have to just not worry too much about being perfect and just go for it. There we go. That looks pretty good. So we can assemble our front sentiment piece now, and when I cut my wheel out, I did remember to put the double-sided adhesive on the back of it, but I think first I'm going to adhere this piece to the mat, and I'm going to use my liquid adhesive for this again. You could use your Stamp and Seal, whatever you're comfortable using. Okay, so that's adhered, and then I want to adhere the wheel down here in the bottom right. So I'm going to peel off the backing and expose that double-sided adhesive, and it's sticky. And then just place this wheel down here in the bottom right corner, just like that. And then I wrapped this piece with linen thread, and I wrapped it around 3 times. And then I just tied it in a simple square knot. I thought a square knot would be more appropriate for a masculine card than a bow. Just like that. And I don't mind if this is a little bit loose. I think it adds a little bit of character to the front of the card. And then I popped the sentiment up on dimensionals, and I'm using the minis here. And kind of alternating them back and forth between one edge and the other. So this will sit level because it's probably going to be sitting on the thread that I just put on there, which is fine, but with the dimensionals on either edge, it will help this sentiment piece sit level on the card, which is what I want. And I'm going to let this hang over just a smidge. There we go. And then we want to adhere this to the front of the card. And again, I'm using liquid glue. And we'll just center this on the lower flap here. You could put this on dimensionals also. The card does have a bit of thickness to it with the pop-up insert. That's why I chose just to pop up the smaller sentiment piece. But I don't think this card will take extra postage, but you could pop this up on dimensionals, especially if you plan to hand deliver it. That would be pretty also. Next, we're ready to do the stamping for the inside of the card. So I have the 2 smaller squares that are 2 3/4 inch square. And you'll notice on this card that they sit on a diagonal when the card is open. So when you do your stamping, you want to be aware of that and do your stamping in that orientation. I have selected the smaller sailboat from the Sailing Home stamp set and the compass from that set, and I'm using crumb cake to stamp these images. And depending on how much ink is in your crumb cake ink pad, you may not need to stamp off first. Mine is getting to the point where I should re-ink it, so I'm not having to stamp off before I stamp these images. I'm just going to stamp them directly. If you were getting too dark of an image, then you'd want to stamp off first. But mine's fairly light, and I'm happy with that. Then I'm going to put the compass over here, coming in from the top left edge, just like that. And now that one came out a little dark, but I think we'll be fine. My sentiment is going to go down here. And then for the signature piece, where I can sign the card or write a little note, I'm going to have this compass coming in from the bottom left corner, just like that. Now I'm going to stamp the sentiment on this piece, and remember, these will be on their point on the inside of the card, so the sentiment needs to go across the diagonal. And I have my sentiment set up on my Stamparatus, and what I did is I put the sentiment on an angle so that I could put the cardstock even with the top edge, so that I could, if I'm doing multiples, I can just place the cardstock in there and not worry about the placement. So I already have it set up to stamp across the diagonal, and I have it on the back of the plate that I had the lighthouse and the seagulls on. So your Stamparatus is really a handy tool for doing multiple stamping and multiple cards at once. So I'm just going to place a magnet on there, and again I'm using the Misty Moonlight for the sentiments. And this sentiment is going to cross over into the sailboat just a little bit. Perfect. I like that a lot. Okay. Now that we have our inside pieces stamped, it's time to adhere them to the pop-up element. So we want the two wings that are creased at the diagonal on the right and the left sides. They're the pieces that are going to fold in like that, and we're going to adhere our stamped pieces to the bottom square and the top square, just like this. Okay, so again, I'm using my liquid adhesive. Use whatever you're comfortable with here. I like to have the little bit of time to move things around when it's a case where I have to line things up. And there is a little bit of a border around these to help frame them. Oops, and I have it the wrong way. There we go. I want the compass down in the bottom left corner here so that I can write a note or sign this, just like that. And then this piece will go in the top. The next step is to adhere this entire element to the inside of our card. So we want to bring the sides in, fold it down, and I like to burnish it just one more time. And we'll open our card up, and we're going to adhere this so that this center point is touching this crease, and the right and the left points are touching the right and left sides of the card, and that puts the bottom point right at the bottom of the card. Everything fits just perfectly in here. So we want to put glue on the bottom of this. So just open it up once, check and make sure that that's the bottom, and apply glue to that square. Then adhere it so that that center point is right up against the crease. Line up the left and the right points and the bottom. And then while it's still closed, this piece is still closed, apply glue to this top square. And bring the flap down on it and apply a little bit of pressure so that we get good adhesion, good contact with the glue. And I'll give that a second to start setting up. And there we have it. Wonderful. I love this card. And the final little bit of embellishment is to tie a piece of trim around this part of the card. I call it the bookbinding part, and I chose the braided linen trim. This is retiring. When the new catalog comes out, this will no longer be available. And I'm just going to tie another simple square knot up here. So I'll just straighten this out. And one nice feature about this braided trim is that if you just tap on the ends, it frays and gives it a little extra texture, a little extra interest. And there you have the fun fold with a pop-up inside. We have a masculine version and a more feminine or floral version. And just a shout out to Tammy Beard for coming up with this wonderful card. I love it. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. You can find me at foggybonnet.com. Links for signing up for my newsletter, for finding my blog, and for shopping with me will be in the description, along with the cutting dimensions for the elements for this project. Thanks, and I'll see you again soon.